Sure. All right, we're going to get going here. Welcome, everyone. First, I want to welcome our great speaker who's with us today. Madam Speaker, thanks for joining us. We have a couple things on the agenda. We will start by saying we're in the joint hearing room today because we had some technical issues in our regular hearing room, so we're in here. We're going to start with our fiscal briefing. Mr. Romans is at the desk. Not to spoil the surprise, but we had the higher ed briefing set, and we just finished closeout of our fiscal year, which for those online who aren't familiar with that, what we've done is now looked at our last year of fiscal spending to see, did we spend more than we had allocated? Did we spend less? Did we spend right on? And I don't want to spoil the surprise, but we actually ended the fiscal year in a surplus. And I think that that is good news, and I think a testament to the work under Speaker Jones that we've done with fiscal constraint over the last few years, the work that, frankly, the Speaker, the Governor, and the Senate President have done in spurring economic development, recognizing our reliance on federal jobs to make sure that the private sector continues to hum in Maryland. And I think it's good news for our state. And I think it, I would be remiss if I didn't say, I don't want to be naive, that we know that what this good news is about our fiscal sort of state budget, but we know that the national economy continues to have a lot of trouble ahead with the tariffs from our president, with this big dumb bill that they passed, cutting social services and giving tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. And I think in Maryland we need to continue the work that we've done thus far, which is to ask millionaires and billionaires to continue to pay their fair share. It's going to be more important than ever to protect our social safety net, given the fact that the federal government's not going to be a partner in this. And that's scary times, but I know with the leadership we have with our Speaker and our Governor, we're well set up for it. And I know with the news we're going to get from David will give us some good news as to how we can hopefully cushion any future turbulence ahead from the uncertainty and chaos of the federal government. So with that, David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Speaker. You should have a fiscal update document. I think it's been handed out to you all on your desks. If you turn to the first page, I'm going to cover really two topics today. One is the fiscal 25 closeout and what that means for the state. The other is the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill in terms of both the revenues, as the Comptroller's Office has issued a report on what the revenue impacts of that will be for Maryland, as well as the spending impacts that you've heard about before. And then at the end, I'll sort of update our general fund forecast for that new information. We last produced it at the end of session, so kind of give you a picture of where things stand at the moment. All right, so on page one, we look at the closeout. The state closed the fiscal year with a surplus of 521, well, general fund revenues beat the estimate, I should say, by $521 million. It came in 2% higher than the estimate for fiscal 25. There are two major components of that. The personal income tax overperformed by $264 million, and the always illuminating miscellaneous revenue category overperformed by $112 million. The income tax was driven largely by capital gains and other non-wage withholding income that came in very strong. We also saw wage withholding beat the estimate by a modest amount. It grew about 1% more than was expected. I submit on the wage withholding that what that reflects is that the BRE was fairly conservative last March, assuming that there would be significant job losses from the federal cutbacks that would impact fiscal 25 revenues. It seems that many of those job losses aren't going to start showing up until fiscal 26. So I think that's one of the reasons that withholding came in stronger than expected. One of the reasons those job losses aren't showing up yet is that a lot of people took essentially buyouts that kind of keep them paid through September. So they haven't actually left the workforce yet. So I think later in the fall, we'll start to see more of an impact of some of the federal job cuts. On the miscellaneous revenues, there's a lot of things in that category. The biggest piece, nearly half of it, is abandoned property beat the estimate by close to $50 million. Second year in a row, abandoned property has come in very strong. I don't know that we have a clear explanation of why that is happening, but it has been a strong source of revenue the last couple of years. Page 2 shows you the closeout revenue detail, shows you the actual revenues for fiscal 25 from the major categories of revenue, what the estimate was, the difference, and so forth. I would note over on the right-hand side, we show the growth over 24. Overall, general fund revenues grew 4% compared to fiscal 24, with the personal income tax being the primary driver of the growth. And you may, if you look at that far right column, notice lottery is down 21%. That does not mean lottery revenues fell off by 21%. What happens is when lottery revenues come in, some of them are committed to fund various things with as special fund spending. So there was a significant increase in the things that are funded with the lottery in fiscal 25. For example, the debt service for the football stadium at Camden Yards as they're doing renovations, the Blue Line corridor, the bus rapid transit, all of those things got a significant amount of lottery revenues in fiscal 25 that didn't in 24. So it's not that the revenues are falling off a cliff, it's that we're using more of them and only the leftover amount goes to the general fund. Turning to page 3, the allocation of the surplus. So the 521 million actually doesn't all stay in the general fund. 139 million of it does stay in the general fund. The rest by statute goes to the revenue stabilization account, the rainy day fund, and the fiscal stabilization fund. And the reason for that is that those revenues, nearly 382 million, reflect capital gains and other non-wage withholding beating the estimate. And that's the part by statute that goes to those two funds. The fiscal stabilization fund, for those who don't remember, is used for capital projects. So it's pay-go capital for fiscal 27's budget. It can only be used for K through 12 education and higher education projects. So to wrap up, fiscal 25 closed with a 271 million general fund balance. The rainy day fund closed with a balance of about 2.4 billion, which is roughly 9% of revenues. So on page 4, I turn to the other topic, the one big beautiful bill. The first page highlights the revenue impacts. As I said, the Comptroller's Office has issued a report on the dollar impacts, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But there were 4 major tax provisions that they identified that have a significant impact on Maryland revenues. There are a number of other provisions in the bill, but they don't have as much of an impact on our revenues. The first relates to the personal income tax. The bill extends and increases the SALT limitation on the amount of state and local taxes you can deduct when you itemize on your federal return. It increases that cap from $10,000 to $40,000, and it extends this limitation that would have expired if not for this bill. So there's sort of good news and bad news here. The decision to extend the SALT limitation is a positive for the state because it generates revenue for the state because people's taxable income goes up because they can't deduct as much of their state and local taxes. The negative is that they went from this $10,000 threshold to $40,000, so we won't get as much money as we would have if they'd stayed at the $10,000 because people can write off more when they deduct. They've got more state and local taxes that they can deduct on their federal taxes, which reduces their liability on state taxes as well. So it's a positive, but not as much as was anticipated last session. The other changes that are significant relate to business income. They relate to full expensing of domestic research and experimental expenditures. So essentially, they're just accelerating when businesses can write off those expenses. Same thing with certain qualified production property, accelerating when the deductions can be taken. And they also modified a limitation on business interest expense deductions to, again, allow businesses to deduct more. So all of those are going to have a negative impact on the state revenues. Now, because they have an impact of more than 5 million each, in the first year, the state automatically decouples. State law automatically decouples us from anything that the Comptroller's Office finds would have an impact of more than $5 million. But after that, we would align with the federal changes unless the General Assembly were to take action next session to decouple on a more permanent basis. I would note that for fiscal 27 and 28, if you don't decouple, that costs you $200 million roughly a year. So there is, from a state fiscal standpoint, there's reasons to think about decoupling. Obviously, from a business standpoint, they would like to be able to get more tax relief and have you not decouple. All right, page 5 just provides a little bit more text about that change. I'm going to actually turn you to the next page, page 6, which is a graphic that compares what was assumed in our forecast, legislative services forecast at the end of session, to what the BRE is actually showing. So the BRE Controller's Office analysis of the bill is the blue bars. And you can see they think overall it has a net negative impact on revenues in 26, 27, and 28. That's because the business tax reductions have a bigger impact than the positive impact of the SALT deduction being continued, or limitation being continued. The red bars show what was assumed both by the Moore administration in its beginning of session forecast and by DLS in the end of session forecast, which was we didn't know what Congress was going to do. So all we assumed was that they extended the SALT limitation at the $10,000 threshold. That would have generated $300 million a year. Because they changed it from the $10,000 to the $40,000 on the limitation, it only is going to generate us about $150 million a year. And then those business taxes, which we did not anticipate in the forecast, cost us revenue. So that's why, compared to what we were assuming during session, it's a much worse outlook. But as you see, the controller's actual analysis of what the impact is relatively modest. All right, you've heard, as I cover on page 7, the discussion of the spending impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Previously, I'll just give you a quick refresher. 2 areas that has significant impact. One is the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Congress did 2 things. They increased the administrative cost share for states from 50% to 75%. That will kick in fiscal 27. That will cost us about $58 million in fiscal 27 in terms of a cost shift to the state. The other change is asking states for the first time to pay a share of the SNAP benefit costs. Now, the percentage that each state will pay depends on their SNAP error rate. It can be anywhere between 5% of the cost of the benefits to 15%. Maryland has a high SNAP error rate, nearly 14% in federal fiscal 24, which means we would pay the highest cost share, the 15%. That could kick in as early as state fiscal 28. So that'll be significant cost, about $169 million if it kicks in fiscal 28, and that number would grow in subsequent years. The other fiscal impact of this shift is if we ever go into a recession, which inevitably, eventually we will, the SNAP is one of the programs that immediately starts growing in terms of cost because more people qualify for the benefit, and that will then be paying a share of that, which we haven't had to grapple with during recessions in the past. So it makes us more sensitive on the spending side to having to spend more when there's a recession, on top of the other entitlement programs that we already fund. On Medicaid, that's the other area there's a significant impact from the One Big Beautiful Bill. It has 2 components that are important. One is it has work requirements for Medicaid adult recipients who qualify through the Affordable Care Act expansion. So these are modest but income adults. It also requires more frequent eligibility redeterminations for those folks. So in the near term, there's going to be an increase in administrative costs for the state as we have to set up a process for administering the work requirements, because we've never had that in the Medicaid program. We also will have costs related to doing the more frequent eligibility redeterminations. Once these programs kick in and they're phased in over a couple of years, we do expect significant savings. As national estimates for Maryland suggest somewhere between 130,000 and 175,000 people will lose their Medicaid coverage as a result of the more frequent eligibility redeterminations and the work requirements. That equates to about a quarter to about half of the people in the ACA expansion population, which is about 330,000 people in Maryland. All right, so I try to pull it all together on the next page, page 8. It shows you all the general fund forecast at the end of session on a cash basis, and then making adjustments for the topics we've talked about where we stand right now. For fiscal 26, the picture is sort of the same as the positive closeout washes out the impacts of the federal bill. Fiscal 27 is a bit worse with about $300 million shortfall projected. And then you can see, as you knew at the end of session, significant challenges for 28 through 30. Now, there's two things that are not in these numbers. One is the BRE will be doing its official revenue revision on Thursday. Now, part of that revision will include the one big beautiful bill estimates that I talked about, but they may make other adjustments. So there could be some further changes there. The thing I'm more worried about is that we will be updating our spending forecast both for fiscal 26 and 27 to take into account deficiencies in 26 and how that impacts 27 estimates. In looking at the closeout detail that the Comptroller's Office has released on the spending side, state agencies reported being short about $250 million at the end of fiscal 25 and not having enough money to pay all of their fiscal 25 bills. So they'll be paying those bills with fiscal 26 dollars and are going to need a deficiency. So we already sort of know there's going to be some additional costs. The good news, as I noted on the last slide, is as of right now, you have that $300 million general fund surplus for 26, and you have $2.3 billion in the rainy day fund. So combined, that gives you a cash balance of about $2.6 billion, which is roughly 10% of general fund revenues. So you have a significant amount of cash available to help mitigate the impacts of deficiencies and some of the challenges for 27. So in the near term, it is likely a manageable situation. You still have that longer term problem starting in fiscal 28 to grapple with. Mr. Chairman, that completes my remarks.
Thank you, David. Thanks for the presentation, efficient and informative as ever. Any questions for Mr. Romans? So, David, if I get this right, from the 10,000 foot, Julian Ivey, Delegate Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Speaker, for the work that you all led during the session to make sure that we were in this position with revenues and the surplus that we're in. And Mr. Romans, thank you for your presentation. It's just tough for me because, we're looking at the data and, in my district, 24,000 people are on Medicaid benefits, 12,000 receiving SNAP benefits, and these are like real people, right? We're talking about poor kids who are hungry and don't have food in their bellies. We're talking about seniors on Medicaid. And so I just wanted to really take a moment and center those real people who are having their benefits cut. I've seen so many of my colleagues from my party say everything and do everything in their power to try and get the federal government to blink. But instead, here we are. And I haven't heard very much from individuals from across the aisle. We have our own Andy Harris, who is gleefully cutting jobs, cutting benefits. And I just wanted to make sure we centered those very real people. Been waiting, and the silence is deafening from members of this chamber. We're calling on individuals to do everything that they can. Yeah, I'd love to hear your input. But Mr. Romans, do you think that it would be helpful if members of the Republican Party could reach out?
I don't think that's an appropriate question for Mr. Romans, but I think your point is well taken, and we appreciate that. And look, obviously, I think everyone in this room cares about Medicaid benefits. And I think that no one here would say that the actions of the federal government are good or helpful to the citizens of the state and particularly rural hospitals. But I don't think this is something for David Romans to reply to, so I think we can take that offline.
Understood. Yeah. I hope to hear from my colleagues.
Yeah. Yep. Delegate Watson.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Just for people who might be listening other than us, and probably for some of us, can you explain why we have the big jump from 27 to 28 in the general fund balance deficit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. The biggest is the Blueprint Fund largely covers our Blueprint implementation costs through fiscal 27, because we built up over a number of years a large fund balance in the Blueprint Fund that is supporting those costs. And the Blueprint Fund will close fiscal 27 having expended all of that built up balance. So starting in fiscal 28, we only have the ongoing Blueprint revenues. So we have to substitute general funds for all these Blueprint dollars. That's a big reason for that big kind of cliff that you see in 28. Another impact is that the SNAP benefits under the One Big Beautiful Bill that the state would have to start picking up nearly $200 million of costs there. And then there's just a lot of other increasing mandates and other, growth and entitlement programs and so forth. That's more normal growth. But the blueprint and some of these federal changes are big parts of the impact.
I think that's a good point, because where I was headed just a moment ago is, look, what I'm hearing from you is our fiscal situation right now, we closed the fiscal year in a surplus. That's strong, that we have this really robust rainy day fund, $2.8 billion, together with the revenue volatility fund. It gives us a good cushion to sort of try to take care of people should we see the second part of this, which is we haven't felt the ramifications yet, as you've said, of DOGE. We haven't yet felt in our budget the ramifications of this big bill. This, I call it the big old dumb bill. So we are very cautious. While we celebrate good news as to the state having balanced its budget and ending with a surplus, we know that there's turbulence ahead. When we do start to feel the impacts of DOGE, when we start to feel the impacts of the big bill. And so I'm happy that we do have this fund balance, but I know that we need to have caution as we move forward. Delegate Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't actually going to say anything. I don't have a question for you, but I feel obligated from the opposite party, and typically this committee
Yeah,
is
Delegate Rice, we let Delegate Ivey have a little bit of a
generally
narrative, so we'll
nonpartisan.
give you a little as well. But
I appreciate that, but this was a challenge by Delegate Ivey for us to speak, and I wasn't going to. I promised I was going to sit tight and not say anything. But we hear constantly that we balanced the budget in the state by cutting the general fund. Shifts of teacher pensions to the counties is not a cut to the general fund. When we, instead of using pay-as-you-go out of the operating costs or out of the operating budget to pay for capital projects and instead borrow money, that's not a cut. When we shift constantly costs from the state onto the counties, that's not a cut. All right, so the federal government, that's what they did here with SNAP. They just shifted the responsibility and the cost from the federal government to the state government. Now, am I saying that that's the right thing to do? I don't know if it is or it's not, but it's exactly the same thing that the state's been doing for the last 2 years to local government. That's all it is.
thank you, Delegate Rice.
No, I'm not finished yet.
Well, no, you're finished. Thank you. Yep,
Are you cutting me off? Or?
I am. Yeah, I think you got about the same amount of time. We're starting to just debate sort of
All right.
fiscal realities and fiscal policy, and we can take that offline when we don't have Mr. Romans, but. I appreciate that. Yeah. I understand. Yep, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Romans? Yep, Delegate Edelson. Please, a question.
You got it, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to just ask you about the notion of the automatic decoupling. For some of us here that might not have that much information about exactly what that looks like and the millions of people watching at home, can you give us a little bit of detail on what the notion of automatic decoupling is and a little more meat on the bone of how that would impact us?
Yes, so normally these changes that I talked about, the federal government makes those changes, and people file their federal returns, and the federal return becomes sort of the starting point for the state tax return. So when we decouple from something the federal government is doing, we essentially are saying, you need to make an adjustment to add back that income to your state starting income for your taxes. So it's basically just saying we're not going to follow the federal law. We're going to stick with the way we've been taxing these things, in the previous year. And by state law, when there's an impact of $5 million or more, as estimated by the Comptroller's Office, that's when there's an automatic decoupling. Just for the 1 year, it's basically intended to give the General Assembly a chance to come back and decide on a more permanent basis what's the policy decision. Do we want to follow along with the federal tax change, or do we want to permanently separate our tax code on that provision from the federal tax code?
Got it. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Romans? Yes, Delegate McComas.
I just wanted to make a comment, and I know I'm going to be veering on policy, but
Any question?
The question is, I believe, and if I'm wrong, somebody can say I'm wrong, isn't agriculture the biggest industry?
Mr. Romans, do you know the biggest
I
thing?
don't believe so, but I can get you that information. I do not know the answer.
No, the reason I say is because when they have ag dinner, they got like thousands of people, you know, and they have to have a big venue. When they have ag dinner and everybody goes, all the legislators and the.
Delegate McComas, this is a good segue
So the
because I
question-
think higher ed is one of our
Okay,
biggest
so the
employers.
question I'm
and
asking
they're
is,
next up.
Have we really thought about ways that we can skin the cat, so to speak, and basically okay, so we can't do SNAP maybe, but if we help the agricultural community be able to subsidize or to, you know, have their products used, that would help them, and that would help the folks with the SNAP benefits as well, because it would cost, you know, they wouldn't have to use all their benefits. They could be more circumspect about what they're going to spend their money on. So I'm just thinking we need to think outside the box. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, Mr. Romans is a fantastic world-class analyst for us, but we're the policymakers, so that'd be a great thing for you to think through and bring to us. Delegate Solomon? Do you have a question?
Very quick question, thank you. I know one of the things we got last year as we were working through the revenue changes was a breakdown of exactly the bands and the income impacts. And so obviously the TCGA 2.0, the terrible bill as the chair referred to it, and I would agree, makes a lot of changes for wealthy individuals at the federal level. Is there anything in the works from either your team or the comptroller to sort of look at exactly what income thresholds from the federal tax perspective will do incredibly well in the state, and what kind of a break those bands are going to see at the federal level, and what kind of, as the federal government is shifting their costs back to us, how we could potentially tweak that in the decoupling?
Yeah, I'll follow up with the comptroller's office. I know in order to do their estimates, they did a fairly detailed analysis of trying to estimate, how people's behavior would change and who and so forth. So I will see whether they've done anything along those lines.
All right. Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Thanks for the information. Thanks for being with us. We're going to turn to the second part of our briefing now, impact of federal actions on public higher education, our colleges and universities. We want to welcome Dr. Perman, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Phillips up here. I do see we have our chair of our Board of Regents with us. Welcome. And we have many presidents with us, so welcome. And if anyone up here thinks that there's anything that you need to add, please invite them up if there's a question or something like that. But we'll just start with you three and kind of see where it goes from there. I do also want to say that tonight is Rosh Hashanah. We're going to keep this to a hard stop at 3, so people who need to, who are celebrating and worshiping, can get home. So we're going to keep it to 3 o'clock. Dr. Perman, welcome.
Chair Barnes, Co-Chair Cheng, members of the committee, thank you. Thank you for the chance to talk with you today. I have a number of people here with me. Board of Regents Chair Linda Gooden, Bowie State President Amin Tabro, USM Student Council President Jefferson Vasquez Reyes. Dr. Bro and Dr. Vasquez Reyes will later share their perspectives on how federal actions are affecting our universities and our students. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, many of our USM presidents have joined us today, as have members of my leadership team. In the interest of time, I'll forego introductions. We all know one another. All of my colleagues are happy to answer any questions you have. Counterintuitively, I'm going to start my remarks with 2 pieces of good news. First, we awarded a record number of degrees last year, more than 45,000. And secondly, this fall, we expect to add at least another 1,000 students to our enrollment, bringing us to 172,000 students that we're serving here in the state. That's good for many reasons, aside from supplying Maryland's workforce. We know there's a straight line between education attainment and economic growth. More degree holders in Maryland means higher GDP, more jobs generated, a richer tax base. Now, I want to share why all of this is in jeopardy. Federal actions are having a devastating impact on our work and the resources we have to do that work. I'll begin where we should always begin in these conversations, with our students. While the reconciliation bill passed in July largely preserved Pell eligibility and undergraduate aid, we still have students who will suffer under changes to federal loans. Specifically, we're heavily impacted by the termination of Grad Plus loans for graduate and professional students, which serves as a bridge between the total cost of attendance and other aid. Across the system, 6,000 students borrowed under the Grad Plus program last year. More than half of them are professional students at UMB. And among the programs impacted is medicine, where 40% of our students now borrow through Grad Plus. Physicians are critically needed in Maryland, especially in rural regions. And we fear we'll lose some aspiring providers. Mr. Vasquez-Reyes is going to speak to you briefly on the effect of his own future plans. Excuse me. Our students are being harmed in other ways, too. The administration just announced plans to end discretionary grants for minority-serving institutions, universities that serve a significant share of students from historically underrepresented groups. In addition to the 3 HBCUs in our system, the USM has 3 minority-serving institutions: UBALT, UMBC, and UMGC. Now, UMBC and UMGC don't have any grants under the program, but UBALT has learned that its grant as a predominantly black institution will be canceled immediately. That loss could cost and will cost the university critical staff focused on student recruitment, retention, and success. UBALT's enrollment, yes, is already under pressure, and this cancellation creates an incredibly challenging situation for them. Grant terminations would also harm the MSI-designated community colleges that send students to us, meaning the harm we suffer will be both direct and indirect. We're facing a similar situation with the recent freeze on TRIO grants, which fund academic support services for low-income students, first-generation students, students with disabilities. TRIO is essential for opening access to higher ed and ensuring that we're serving a student population that reflects Maryland's population. We're concerned about our own TRIO grants, but also those funding programs, again, at our feeder colleges, our community colleges, our partners. International students are another group facing enormous uncertainty. Last spring, nearly a dozen of our students had their visas revoked. While all were ultimately reinstated, the atmosphere for international and study and scholarship is decidedly chilled, and it's gotten worse, with wait times for visa appointments now untenable. Together with proposals to limit duration of status for international students to 4 years, which manufactures obstacles for many students, certainly our PhD students. System-wide, we enroll about 12,000 students that are international students. Many serve as graduate assistants, filling vital research and teaching positions across our campuses. If they leave the United States for countries more welcoming of international talent, their absence would materially affect our scholarship and operations. Last spring, we saw a dip in international applications and F1 paperwork. We expect international students to decline perhaps 5% this fall. That's a dip, but we're worried about the drop. The fact that the dip which is modest, has occurred is because this year's admissions cycle had already begun by the time the administration transitioned in the district. Timing is not going to save us next year, and we'll almost certainly see a dramatic drop in international enrollment. And with the administration's proposal just over this weekend to charge $100,000 apiece for H-1B visas, we're assessing the potential impact on our campuses. It's not only our students who are suffering harm under federal actions. The damage done to our research enterprise can't be overstated. The system expended $1.6 billion in research and sponsored programs last year. That means $1.6 billion in funding. $1 billion of that research dollar is directly or indirectly coming from the feds, $1 billion. To date, our grant terminations, current and future year awards total approximately $120 million. When we've gotten a reason for the termination, and we don't always get one, it's most often that the grant included objectives or language related to DEI. On any given day, it's tough to tally how many grants are canceled and how much money is implicated. That's because we're continually fighting to get these grants reinstated, and they sometimes are, but this fight takes an enormous amount of personnel time and resources. And then, of course, additional grants come onto the chopping block. So as you'd imagine, our 3 R1 universities with $1.5 billion plus in combined annual expenditures are most severely affected. UMB, 37 grants canceled, worth $48 million. College Park, 60 grants canceled, worth $30 million. UMBC, about 30 grants canceled, worth $22 million. Towson and UMES have seen losses in the tens of millions of dollars in current and future year obligations. All that said, the funding slowdown at federal agencies, the slowdown, is an even bigger threat to us than the canceled grants, especially from NIH. Huge blow to UMB, where NIH accounts for 80% of federal research dollars, but it's a big blow to Maryland. NIH research supports about 20,000 jobs in Maryland, $5.3 billion in economic activity. Through July, UMB's new award dollars were down 38% over the same time last year, and they saw a 54% drop even in the non-competing continuations. Now, there's been a little uptick in the August awards, but it hasn't made up for these losses. And colleagues, our elected leaders, it's not just dollars on the line. Of course it's not. It's a loss for new cures, new treatments in areas critical to human health. Oncology, genomics, virology, vaccine development. None of the figures I've invoked includes the losses we'll incur with current proposals to slash indirect cost rates. Indirect costs include the labs where we conduct our research, the equipment inside them, the electricity that runs them, the staff who supports them. Our R&D programs are critically supported by staff. And all of the compliance, the regulatory issues that hold us accountable to the government and to the taxpayers, the overhead that supports research. Under the most draconian reimbursement proposal, 15%, this cost shift would be crippling to our universities. It'd be devastating. Depending on where reimbursement rates land, we project a system-wide impact between $70 and $150 million annually. All of this is a loss for Maryland's research infrastructure, our commercialization capacity to drive the economy, but it also harms our people. Not just grant-funded staff positions that will shrink significantly under these grants and these cuts, but we'll see an impact on our faculty, our regular state employees, our grad students too. Across the system, 2,200 graduate research assistants support our R&D. If these programs end or even shrink because the IDC is contracted, the grants are lost, those assistantships, they have to go away, along with the tuition remission and the stipends that fund their education. A terrible blow to the future. Many grad students will not be able to continue, and we will do real damage to our pipeline of next-generation researchers. To sustain the impact of our education, research, our innovation, we need your support. Over the last 2 fiscal years, we've lost $233 million in state funds. Since FY24, our base budget is down more than $210 million. That's about a 10% cut. And in this environment, with both federal and state funding under threat, there's nowhere we can turn to make up the difference, not without compromising our #1 promise, affordability. We can't simply raise tuition. Most of our universities would lose the low and moderate income students, the first-generation students that we've worked so hard to attract. And I know President Breaux can speak to this. But now we're cutting dangerously close to the bone. We've already slashed non-personnel operating expenses to address earlier state cuts, meaning future cuts would harm our people. Our universities would have to look at layoffs. We don't want to do it. We know you don't want it either, but the pressure on our revenues is real and it's crippling. So I thank you for this opportunity to share what we're facing and for your partnership as we navigate these challenges. I will invite Dr. Breaux and Dr. Vasquez-Reyes to briefly share their perspectives. Please.
Good afternoon. I am Aminta Breaux, very proud 10th president of Bowie State University, the oldest HBCU in the state of Maryland. And I want to thank you for your time today, Madam Speaker, Chair Barnes, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about what's near and dear to our hearts, our campuses that are challenged these days. I also want to begin with expressing our deep gratitude for the steadfast support this body has provided to higher education and to our university system of Maryland. Your partnership has enabled us to sustain excellence while keeping access and affordability at the center of our mission. But today I'm speaking to you as the president of BSU, but also as the chair of the Council of University System Presidents. Collectively, our institutions embody Maryland's promise of access, equity, and excellence, but we are facing headwinds that threaten our progress. The recently passed reconciliation bill is reshaping federal student aid in ways that create significant and real affordability barriers. It introduces new student aid index caps and adds foreign income into aid calculations, reducing or eliminating Pell eligibility for many of our students. At the same time, the bill eliminates subsidized undergraduate loans and Graduate Plus loans, forcing families to turn to higher interest borrowing. Research grants and contracts, as the Chancellor has mentioned, are also under strain. NIH and SF awards have been canceled or reduced, and the Department of Education freezes on TRIO programs weaken access pipelines, especially for our low-income and first-generation students. These disruptions directly affect our ability to recruit students, retain faculty, and advance our research efforts. Meanwhile, as the Chancellor referenced, our international students and faculty, essential to our teaching and our research, face new barriers due to visa restrictions and policy uncertainty. Taken together, these challenges destabilize higher education and our ability to just deliver on our mission of access and affordability to a quality educational experience for our students. In times of financial pressure, some universities will look to tuition as a lever, but raising tuition, I submit to you, is not sustainable or equitable as a solution, particularly at Maryland's HBCUs. Nearly half of our students rely on Pell Grants, and the majority come from low and moderate income families. For these students, even modest increases in tuition and fees can mean the difference between enrolling or stepping away from higher education. And we know that each time a student steps out, they're less likely to return and persist to graduation. As the American Council on Education has emphasized, increases in tuition often fall hardest on those least able to pay and do not fully offset structural funding challenges. Similarly, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities has noted that tuition hikes, while a quick budgetary fix, can drive down enrollment among first-generation and low-income students, undermining both access and institutional stability. Demand for our HBCUs remains strong. That's the good news. We received at Bowie State University this year over 12,000 applications for just 1,000 seats for first-time, full-time students. And similarly, our institutions, our other HBCUs in the system have experienced the same demand. Clearly, aspiration is not the problem. However, with growing uncertainty around affordability, many of our students and families, particularly in the DMV region where job displacement is now widespread, they are under increasing financial strain. The pressing question before us is how will we safeguard access and affordability for those striving for a college education? As it was said earlier, these are real people with real aspirations, real goals. For our students, the single greatest barrier to enrolling and graduating on time, as we all would want them to do, without question, the single largest barrier is affordability. At the same time, Bowie State University has lost, I know the Chancellor gave some very significant, very large numbers, but you need to know this, the cuts in grants and contracts has a deep impact and far-reaching consequence for our HBCUs, perhaps not at the same magnitude, but it still has a great impact to us. Bowie State University alone has lost over $8 million in grant funding due to terminations and non-continuances, including $5.8 million from NSF and $2.2 million from the Department of Education that's impacting our UGMA school counseling program. This program was preparing Black men to serve in the K through 12th grade counseling positions throughout the state and the nation. This loss is especially concerning given that Black male educators represent only about 1% of the nation's teachers, a profound shortage that we were addressing with the funds that we were receiving that are now eliminated. Despite these challenges, Maryland's HBCUs, Bowie State University, Coppin State University, and UMES, and I'm sure my colleague to my left will address what's happening at Morgan State. But what I know and I see firsthand is that our HBCUs are the pillars, remain pillars of strength. Together, our Maryland HBCUs generate $1.2 billion annually, support for more than 10,000 jobs, and our graduates add more than $10.5 billion in lifetime earnings. These higher earnings also contribute to the upward mobility for families and generational wealth creation, especially significant for students who have faced historic barriers. The numbers I just quoted come from a study conducted by the UNCF and University of Georgia. Our Maryland HBCUs continue to make significant contributions to the workforce and as economic drivers. At UMES, our 1890 land-grant institution, all across the system, we are celebrating the opening of the first veterinary school based in Maryland, among their many, many achievements. At Coppin State University, the university continues to anchor Baltimore by producing educators, nurses, and health professionals who help sustain the city's workforce. At Bowie State University, we are proud to be ranked number 11 among the more than 100 HBCUs in the nation. We were recognized by Forbes as the number 5 HBCU in the country for best online programs, and we received a newly designated Carnegie Research College and University designation. We have grown our endowment from $7 million to $48 million, expanding scholarships to help close in on the financial need of our students. But we know we cannot do this alone. We need your support. We need to continue to work together if our students are to close in on the financial need that they're facing. But even in the face of funding challenges and affordability concerns, what I want to leave you with is our HBCUs remain steadfast as economic drivers, job creators, and engines of mobility. Madam Speaker and members of the community, Chair Barnes, with your continued investment, I strongly believe that our universities, especially our HBCUs, will remain as anchor institutions for the next century. Bowie State University is celebrating our anniversary of 160 years. Coppin State is celebrating 125 years this year. The reconciliation bill and federal funding disruptions pose real challenges, but together, I believe we can ensure Maryland's higher education system, especially for our HBCUs, remains strong, affordable, and accessible for all who aspire to learn and to lead. Thank you for your time today.
Our original panel, but we do have a 3 o'clock hard stop, so. Who's next? Dr. Wilson?
Did you call on me,
Yes.
Mr. Chair? Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Barnes, Speaker Jones, Vice Chair Ching, and other members of the Appropriations Committee. It is really an honor to come before the committee and to share with you a few data points about Morgan State University that at the core are saying to the state, the investments that you are making in us are returning to the state, indeed, very high dividends. I will address, in the sake of time, what you have asked me to opine on. What has been the impact of the research environment and climate on Morgan? What are we seeing with regard to international student enrollment? And what are we seeing in terms of overall enrollment at the university? So the first data point is this. Morgan is surging. Morgan is in a period of transformation it has never seen in its 158th year history. We, as I sit here today, have nearly 12,000 students back on our campus. That easily could have been 15,000. That easily could have placed Morgan as the 3rd largest in terms of student enrollment public institution in the state. But quite frankly, we have run out of capacity. We had our 6th straight year of new student enrollment. We received just south of 30,000 applications for 2,500 freshmen. Of that total student population of nearly 12,000, about 9,200 or so of them are undergraduates. They come from every one of your districts represented here. Every district in the state has students from Morgan represented. Also, for the very first time, we have over 2,000 graduate students and over 1,000 PhD students. Morgan is on track to become an R1 very high research university within the next year. We will join our colleagues at College Park, at UMBC, and at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, on the penthouse of research in the public space in the state of Maryland. I want to acknowledge my Vice President for Research and Economic Development, who's been with me on this trek for the last 7 years, Dr. Willie E. May, who's here to my left. He is the former director of NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and was the Undersecretary of Commerce in the Obama administration, and has come on board to help us build out the infrastructure and to be more competitive for research grants. As of June 30th this year, in terms of research awards, we were nearly $105 million in new awards. That is really the result of the incredible work and effort that Dr. May and our top-notch research faculty at Morgan have been doing over the last several years. I want to share with you a couple of more data points about the research piece. You know, in 2023, we had research expenditures, I have the chart here we'll show you, of $29 million in research expenditures. I should say only $29 million. And with the $29 million in research expenditures, Morgan generated 13 patents. Well, you might ask, so what is the big issue about that, if at all? Well, that ranked us number 98 in the United States in terms of patents for that particular year, 98. The top 100 institutions were ranked. That's the first time in the history of these rankings that any HBCU in America has ever made the list of the top 100. However, and I'm on the record, the institution ranked number 90 was the University of Georgia. It had research expenditures of $545 million and 15 patents. Morgan had research expenditures of 29 and had 13. The state is getting a hell of a return on the investment being made in Morgan State University. We also have, that research, I should say, has led to 19 startup companies, and they are employing individuals in these very innovative spaces. And so we are very proud of the ascendancy that we're seeing at Morgan, and in terms of that economic impact, I do want to make a point. I want to slightly correct the data for Morgan in particular that my colleague, President Bro, shared with you coming out of the UNCF. That UNCF number for Morgan is not accurate. You can go online. I have informed the president of the UNCF of that. Morgan started 7 years ago, actually commissioning our own economic impact study. And we released the latest just in December of last year. So Morgan alone has an economic impact in this state of $1.5 billion. We're more than happy to share a very comprehensive economic impact study with you. That's $1.5 billion just for Morgan annually. For every $1 in annual state funding to Morgan, we return to the state $6 in economic impact. That's a 600% return on that. Of that $1.5 billion in terms of annual economic impact, 1.5 million of that, 1.4 billion of that, I should say, is in the Baltimore metropolitan area. 891 million is in Baltimore City. We are responsible for generating 8,200 jobs in Maryland, which 7,450 of them are in the Baltimore metropolitan area, and then 4,800 of them, of course, are in Baltimore City. Once again, data points with regard to economic impact. And then last, a word or two about our students. Yes, I gave an interview to Maryland Public Television a week or so ago, and I said, I think we at Morgan have the best students in higher education in the country. Of course, you would expect any university president to say that, but our students are just so amazing. And what keeps me in the presidency there is the ability to touch so many of those students who don't understand how brilliant they are. Because I was one of them, and someone touched me. And the students that I touch are 10 times more brilliant than their president. They just don't know it. They just need someone to basically bring that out of them. And that's why I can say, because I walk the campus, I meet students. I know over half of the students that walk across the stage when they graduate, and I see their growth. So we have some amazing students at Morgan who can compete with anyone, any place, anytime, anywhere, wherever you went to school. And those students, 90% of them qualify for financial aid. 90% of those 11,850 students. Of the 90%, nearly 60% of them qualify for the Pell Grant. Of the 60% that qualify for the Pell Grant, over 30% of them qualify for the maximum Pell. And members of the committee, what that means is that, vernacularly speaking, their parents can't put their hands in their pockets and pull out 2 Lincoln pennies to rub together to send to Morgan to pay their tuition. They certainly can't even think about calling home and saying to their parents, can you please call the bursar's office and use your credit card? They don't have one. And so with some of the proposed cuts that we are seeing on the Hill in particular, it's personal, because I see if those things were to move forward, so much talent and so much brilliance would not have an opportunity to bloom. They would not have an opportunity to climb. They would not have an opportunity to be the next generation of engineers and innovators and computer scientists. They would not have an opportunity to be the next leaders in AI. That would be a travesty. We thank you for your investment in Morgan, the national treasure, and we always promise to give you the greatest return on it. Mr. Chair, those are my
Thank you, Dr.
comments.
Wilson. I think we'll take comments and questions at the end, but I did want to send my condolences to the whole Morgan State family on the loss of Dr. Richardson. Great Marylander, great president, great leader for Morgan State. So our condolences.
Thank you, and I'm honored to have followed after his presidency. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips.
Madam Speaker, Chair Barnes, Vice Chair Chang, and members of the House Appropriations Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Rhonda Phillips. I'm the new president of St. Mary's College of Maryland as of July 1. And I want to begin my remarks first by thanking the staff at DLS for an excellent presentation, and similarly thank each of you for the support that you've given us. I came to Maryland in part because I've seen the great work that this group has done to lift up the state's higher education system, but also because of what I've seen you do for St. Mary's specifically. And I look forward to building long, productive relationships with each of you as we proceed over these next few years. But I want to skip straight to the point. What we've witnessed in the last few months in higher education has been unprecedented. It has also been often alarming, and it's a brisk pace. It's hard to keep up with all the changes that are coming. Federal policy changes have shifted not only the realities of that our students face within the classroom, but access to many points in their lives. Our staff and faculty are also facing challenges as they seek to navigate their personal and professional responsibilities to us, the National Public Honors College, which I do want to take one moment and say we are ranked number 5 in the nation for public liberal arts colleges, number 5 in the nation. I just want to make sure we know that because you've got a very wonderful honors college here in the state. I understand we've got a busy agenda for the rest of the time, and I do want to leave time for questions because I'm eager to see what you're thinking and how we can provide more data, all of us and my colleagues here. Let me just run through a quick little list of 4 impact areas. Now, we are a small college. We're not huge, but we do research. It's not a lot, but we do it, and it impacts us in a very large way. So when we get cuts to research, which may sound like a drop in a bucket to a big R1, but to us is an outsized impact when we have cuts to, say, NIH and our counseling services, or when we can't get the grants that normally come every year from the U.S. Department of Education because those have been canceled. Speaking, the second thing about the U.S. Department of Education, what's the clarity on the role? What is happening with it? What do we know in the future, and how do we even ask? And often the people that we try to reach and ask are no longer there. So no one really knows what's happening with the U.S. Department of Education, which provides oversight for all the institutions of higher ed in this nation. 3, the visa issue. We just heard this very quelling effect of a $100,000 fee. We're waiting for clarity. We do have faculty that impacts, and it's very disturbing. So it's a big hit, again, for a small, we run a very lean, tight institution, and that's a big hit. 4, the quelling and chilling effect on campus cannot be overstated. The inability to bring in international students. It's always been tougher at a small school. Well, that's pretty much over now. We don't have much hope to bring in international students. But more than that, it's the uncertainty that we face. And especially as a small entity, we just do not know what the impacts will be. That includes, for example, any additional cuts to federal financial aid, like the Parent Plus Loans program. A lot of our students, just like my colleagues have explained here, are Pell eligible and receive Pell grants, but also the vast majority have some sort of financial aid to afford to go to school. We are an affordable institution in the state and the region, and also in comparison to our peers, but we can't hope to continue to do what we do best without some more certainty and clarity on what the role is. So I'm eager to hear what you're thinking as well. I'll turn it over to questions now and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think this is your first budget hearing or hearing with appropriations, so welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Let's hear from our student council representative, and then we can do questions. And if we want to get Dr.
Thank
Burlow
you.
for that as well.
Hello, everyone. Madam Speaker, Chair Barnes, Vice Chair Chang, and members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jefferson Vasquez Reyes, and I'm a student at the University of Maryland, College Park, majoring in psychology as a pre-med student. And I have the great pleasure of serving as the University System of Maryland Student Council President, representing more than 170,000 students in our system. I wanted to share a bit of my story. My inspiration for medicine comes from caring for my mother and grandmother throughout my childhood. During high school, my grandmother's end-stage renal disease diagnosis was a turning point for my life, but a Latino physician treated her with dignity and showed me that people from my community belong in medicine, and not just as staff, but as providers. I wanted every patient to receive the same level of care my grandmother had. To prepare, I attended community college and graduated debt-free, then continued at the University of Maryland College Park as a Frederick Douglass Scholar, a full tuition scholarship covering 2 years of my education. Today, I will not only speak for myself, but speak for many students across the USM who now face a barrier to fields like medicine. On July 4th, the One Big Beautiful Bill became law and included an amendment that removed Grad Plus and Parent Plus loans, leaving only unsubsidized loans capped at $50,000 per year for professional education. That amount is insufficient to cover medical school costs. This change has delayed my path to becoming a physician and left me questioning whether it will remain possible. More than 40% of the current first-year class at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, as Chancellor Perman stated, School of Medicine will need to turn to the private loan market. In short, it is one thing to fall short on merit, but it is devastating to be unable to even take the first step forward because a system has decided that my dream and my calling to heal are only for those who can afford it, setting the price tag of that dream out of reach. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, and we hope you won't give up on your dream, and we don't think you will. Good. Big things to come from you, I can see. Any questions for this panel or Dr. Bro? All right, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you to all of you for the incredible work that you're doing and the incredible partnership that you've had with many of us over the years and for persevering in what are incredibly difficult times. I think it's probably an understatement to say we are literally cutting our nose to spite our face. The great research cures, as you mentioned, Chancellor Perman, the economic development, the growth that your institutions have offered our state and our nation. I wanted to just ask, one of the things that I know has been a little murky in the reconciliation bill, because a lot of it we don't really know until the Department of Ed fully finishes their rulemaking, is and to the point that many of you, all of you made about really impacting our lowest income students, is that change from last dollar versus first dollar for Pell, and essentially counting state and private aid first before the Pell calculation is made, which obviously will have a huge impact on the grant programs that we provide to supplement federal aid. So I know the department's starting to go through their rulemaking, but I can only imagine that many of your financial aid administrators are probably pulling their hair out and going sleepless for many of their nights. Do you have any sense of where we are with that, what that could mean for the change in our grant programs here, and how your institutions are trying to deal with that?
I think what we have is exactly what you pointed out, Delegate Solomon, namely a great deal of uncertainty. And beyond what will be in law, we are also terribly worried that no matter how the dollars are doled out, will there be anybody to facilitate the timely distribution of the aid that these students so very much need? It's the dollars themselves, and then it's the workforce needed to get the dollars out the door, and we're as equally worried about that.
We have been doing a lot of scenario planning, and just to add to what Chancellor Perman said, this would not result in a positive outcome for Morgan. In that scenario planning, we could lose 20% of our population. And if an institution that is serving the same demographic profile as we are serving were to sit here and say something different, I would take issue with it. It's very tough, even in the climate before we're in now, when we work with about Dr. Kara Turner, my senior VP for enrollment management, is sitting behind me, but she'll vouch for this. So we work with about 2,000 students from the moment they show up on campus in the fall until we have to submit our official enrollment to MHEC on October the 15th. And we have to drop from campus anywhere from 300 to 500 students. And we have done everything we can. We have allocated them the last dollar. We as a university, in terms of the percent of the revenue that we take in and allocate that back to our students in financial aid, we do more of that than any public institution in the state percentage-wise. So now in this climate, we won't be able to do as much of that because the dollars are going to be cut everywhere. And so I think the long and short of it, Delegate Solomon, is that, these students, as I said earlier, are going to be cut out of not only their ability to achieve their American dream, but the opportunity for America to get from them all the potential that they are imbued with. And that's a sad commentary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to our panel. All these great people that do a lot of good things for our state are here. I just have two brief questions, if you would indulge me. The first question is related to kind of the impacts that the student representative also spoke to from a personal perspective. These cuts are going to affect innovation, and they're also going to affect our ability to tackle health disparities, as was illustrated in just your personal account. Now, whether you go to college or not, you're probably going to interface with the healthcare system. And it's my assumption that most people hope that they'll get a solution to whatever ails them or whatever ails a loved one. And they also hope they're confronted with a practitioner that has not only the requisite medical training, but also possesses the cultural competency to be effective in supporting that patient and their family. And so I wanted to know if you could further distill and unpack, what does it mean if a generation of people of color specifically are essentially eliminated or deeply cut out of the future of being healthcare practitioners? What does that mean for the delivery of care? What does that mean for the development of therapeutics that will be beneficial to a wide array of Americans? What does that mean if you do not have people becoming everything that their God-given abilities say they can become purely because of a manufactured federal crisis?
And thank you for your eloquent statement of the situation that we're facing. I'd offer a response in two ways. One with regard to the research that won't be done if, as you say, people of color are cut out of being healthcare providers, and two, bringing it back to the bedside. First of all, with regard to the research, the Cancer Institute, the National Cancer Institute, one of the institutes of the National Institutes of Health, some 2 decades ago, saw the effect that you're teeing up in that there are health disparities, health inequities, because we all are different in the impact of a cancer diagnosis on an African American male with prostate cancer, a Latino woman with breast cancer. We're different. And it may not simply be biological. It may be because we go and see a physician sooner rather than later. There are behavioral issues. And then, of course, there's the issue of the treating physician or nurse practitioner and how he or she treats the individual. At any rate, all of this needs to be studied. And the National Cancer Institute clearly demonstrated that whether you are going to prepare yourself as a scientist, a PhD, or a physician scientist to engage in that kind of inquiry is likely dependent on whether your aunt had breast cancer or your grandfather suffered from prostate cancer. We are influenced in what we study by who we are. So that's the impact in terms of inquiry and why we need so many more. And at the bedside, it's very simple. It's been well demonstrated that outcomes are better if one's health care is provided by somebody who comes from their life experience, their culture, looks like them, the outcomes are better for a whole variety of reasons. It's not because of indifference. So you've said it. If we lose that generation, everything that I mentioned will get worse.
That is why we at Morgan are being proactive in this space as well, precisely because of what the Chancellor just articulated. We, as you know, had proposed affiliating with a group to bring online a for-profit medical school. But we also looked at these numbers, same numbers that you heard from the student president of the system here. And that was just not the model for the future, where the cost of tuition would start out at $60,000 a year. And those students that we're here opining about now can't afford to pay the tuition where that tuition is now. So we have made a pivot with the support of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to basically take the next 2 years and to plan a public, nonprofit medical school that would be solely under the umbrella of Morgan State University, with an intent perhaps to enroll an initial class in 29 or in 30. We are basically playing the long game here, that we have to bring online medical schools that are going to speak to this underserved population. And that's what our intent is. We also have access to 500 African American brains in partnership with the Lieber Institute, and we have just recruited an endowed chair in brain science at Morgan and are looking to, with this medical school, create a center on brain science, primarily so that we can become a leader in the state and in the country in looking at chronic diseases and looking at what is really happening both historically as well as in real time in order to prevent some things from recurring. Delegate Smith, we understand in the short term this is going to have devastating consequences, as you've heard, and we are processing that, understanding that, but still trying to position Morgan to bring online the first medical school at a public HBCU in the country.
Smith's follow-up question.
I'm just waiting for it to, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my one final question is in regards, and I think Chancellor Perman touched on it a bit. I wanted to know if you all could further unpack the challenges that you're experiencing just trying to interpret all the changes with Title IX. What does that mean actually for your grants? Because accusations that things are connected to DEI seem to be kind of vague, and I don't understand how you're even interpreting your actions related to grant funding and policies and how they impact your campus community. I guess in short, if there are federal demands that you withdraw from support that your faculty and students expect your institutions to be fighting for, what will be your response?
I can speak just briefly to that, which is we have a very good staff that do Title IX and also some of the other titles that are related. And what we find is that it's confusing at best because we get different edicts coming out and then they have to be changed. And so we're trying our best to see what is best practice that's quickly emerging, and by looking at what other institutions of the state are doing, but also nationally to see where we can do better with that. It's still a lot of unknowns, and we've had, like all of our counterparts, have had to change language and semantics because it gets threatened. Even us as a small school, we've been asked to do, or ask is a nice word, to remove names and to remove indications, like if we have programs or scholarships, for example, for certain groups. So we've tried very hard to stay current, but it is difficult. It is not an easy task because it's hard to play the game if the rules keep changing constantly. So.
Thank you. Delegate Ruff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Speaker, colleagues, and to the esteemed panel. Thank you all so very much for your work and for delivering this information to us. I had questions about the termination of the minority serving students discretionary grants. My two questions are, can you give us, I know you mentioned the universities that aren't a part of that grant program but are essentially would qualify. Can you give us more specific information about how the termination of those grants are affecting our HBCUs, especially our two HBCUs in Baltimore City? Unfortunately, my district does not have any universities, but I am significantly tied to, obviously, Morgan State and Coppin State University. So I want to know, if there is a dollar amount or to some degree that can be explained, how the termination of those grants are affecting our HBCUs across the state. Of course, I want to acknowledge Dr. Jenkins as well, who is in the gallery, for that question. And then, as a University of Baltimore School of Law graduate, the news about how it's affecting the University of Baltimore is rather troubling. My second question is, and I know attorney-client privileged, communications are exactly that, but has the university system considered or has been talking to the Attorney General's office about whether there's viable, actions that can be taken against the, U.S. Department of Education to try and, number one, stop this in its tracks because of the immediate effects that are going to happen, but also in the future to keep the money flowing through these grant programs.
Thank you for both questions. If I may, let me start, Delegate, with the second question first. Yes, we are in constant communication with the Attorney General's office. They are our lawyer, of course, and whenever there is an executive order where there seems to be legal implication and the potential for legal redress, we consult immediately. As you know, our Attorney General has worked with the Attorneys General of multiple states, and our presidents have been very good when appropriate in providing declarations, providing comment that can be used as an amicus brief in those kinds of efforts. So in response to this particular matter, we are in discussion with our lawyers related to the MSI issue. Now, with regard to the MSI issue specifically, and your alma mater, thank you, namely the University of Maryland, Baltimore, the recent action against an MSI, different from the HBCUs. The HBCUs are not affected by this particular designation. In this particular designation, an MSI, a minority serving institution, and the University of Baltimore is a black serving institution. You have to meet a threshold. You have to have at least 40% of your students in that demographic, and they have met that requirement, and now the financial support that one receives at the University of Baltimore has been cut. Now it's been cut $250,000. Yes, I have hit you with very large numbers because we're a large system. But just as my colleague at St. Mary's says, $250,000 is a lot of money to the University of Baltimore. And what does it mean for their students? This kind of money supports personnel that help those very students, and 11 students that tutor them, 11 tutors. So it may not sound like a lot of money, but it's a big deal.
Thank you.
Just say a word about Morgan. Let me go back to the research grants. Initially, we also received letters terminating several of our grants. 22 of them were terminated initially. and they had a total value of $12.5 million. I spoke about Dr. May earlier. He and I had conversations about this and decided that, of course, we would reach out to the Attorney General's office initially, which we did, but we would also push back, primarily because of history, that in whatever way the current administration has defined its version of DEI, we are not that. You know, in terms of the way they have described that. We are mission-driven institutions, and we are in state law via Title III, Part B, that goes back to 1965, when that term HBCU, or that acronym HBCU, was first used in the history of American higher education. Prior to 1965, there was no HBCU. And the federal government was basically trying to decide how to distinguish this group of institutions that it had neglected since 1837, the founding of Cheney University outside Philadelphia. So if they wanted to do something at the federal level to enhance them, then going forward, how would they distinguish between this set of institutions that they wanted to make some kind of investment in versus institutions in the future that may also be predominantly black or whatever the ethnicity of the student population they serve. So in that legislation, they said, this enhancement would be for those institutions that are black colleges, which is what they were called, or going forward, historically black colleges and universities. And so that was the first time that phrase entered the lexicon. And so therefore, you gave us that destination, if you will, as HBCUs. And that way, that is over here. We have never, ever said to any student, the whole sector of HBCUs, we've never said to any student, you can't come to this institution because you are not black. That has never happened. Some students have basically decided not to, but that's not written in any literature. We don't admit students at Morgan. I don't know of an HBCU in the country that admits students based on race. So what the chancellor said was accurate in that we pushed back. Initially, we got some of those grants at Morgan actually to be lifted, and then we had drawn down significantly on the ones that were terminated. But at the end of this period, it was a net negative impact of $3 million on us going forward. The last point is we are trying to take the argument that we are making here to Washington as well. We're trying to see if there's any room for any kind of penetration here to kind of let you see that you are cutting off your nose to spite your face here, as Delegate Smith and others have said. You know, it has taken this country since 1636, the founding of Harvard, that long to build a higher education system that is the envy of the world. You don't tear that down, and you can overnight. And if you do that, it will take 200 years to build it back. So yes, we have to stand up, we have to stand tall, and we really cannot be hesitant in this moment. Because I think history will not judge us kindly.
Hear, hear. Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of time, I'll ask one of my two questions, and thank you to the panel for your testimony. My question is for Dr. Bro with Bowie State. If you mind coming to the panel, please. Appreciate your testimony, Dr. Bro. One thing that I found concerning was you'd indicated that there were cuts in federal grants that had impact on the Black Male Educator Project at BSU. And what I find particularly concerning about that is we're looking Maryland's public school system, a third of it are black students, and just 4% of our teaching workforce are black male educators. And the concern that I have with that is that we've seen studies after studies from both partisan and nonpartisan think tanks. Brookings, I think it was National Center on Teacher Quality, that showed the presence of black male educators, but just black educators in the classroom and the impact that that has on students, specifically black student success. And the concern that I have is that everyone always opines about black students and their academics, but when we have data and policies in place to ensure that we're not just diversifying the classroom, but improving black students' success, we're seeing policies like this that are hampering that. And so what I'm curious to know is just what that figure, or that grant that BSU receives for this program. And in addition to that, I know in the blueprint, because I raised this concern when we were looking at it in 2021, what we passed, it included EPPs, I believe, or educator preparation programs to ensure diversity, to ensure, is there a way for us to, I guess, and we could follow up on this, expand that so we're essentially not stopping the work of the Black Male Educators Project at BSU, but an opportunity for the state, I guess, to sort of fill that void that we're now seeing right now.
Thank you for your question. Support is desperately needed, and you're absolutely right. The research has shown, and research done, including at Bowie State University by Dr. Julius Davis, that black males, especially who do not see someone who looks like them by the time they're in third grade, are less likely to go on to higher education and pursue education. And so this is a serious matter that over $1.2 million was cut to support the efforts that were underway and have been for some time based on research. And the work that we're doing at Bowie State University links to a larger network called the Bond Project to address the shortage of black male educators. So we were leading the way, making great progress in this endeavor, but the funds are gone. We have a Center for the Black Male Initiative that was providing mentors, not just working in the classroom to produce, to focus on academics, but also providing mentoring and other supports to encourage the pipeline into the workforce. So there is no way to fill this gap at Bowie State University. We have made significant changes to our operating budget. We're trying desperately to preserve elements to the best of our ability for this project to continue, but it's very, very challenging. There was no appeal process provided to Bowie State University in this respect. The grant was simply cut. And so while the question was, are we going to the courts? Yes, we are, but there has been no remedy to restore these grants. So funds are needed to continue these efforts. Right now, we do not have the funds to sustain all elements of the project.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems like jeopardizing black student success, and the state certainly needs to step up in this regard, but I was very troubled to hear that because, we often hear in the legislature folks, again, commenting, opining about black student success and so on, and here we have data, hard data that shows what contributes to black students succeeding academically, and we're essentially jeopardizing that over, partisanship. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Delegate McComas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Speaker. Real quick question. I would assume that all of the colleges and even the community colleges as well as the private colleges are in the same, maybe not the exact same circumstance that you all are in, but because not everyone is a maybe more minority-based school, but all of them are having problems. And I'm wondering, do you belong to any associations that you can collaborate, and all 50 states and I guess the territories, if they've got colleges, could go in and start, walking the halls and just lobby, because it seems to me that the more numbers and the more pressure, it would be something good to do. The other comment I would like to make is I'm from Harford County, and we have APG and Edgewood Arsenal, and we have They're great, okay. And that's national defense. And besides the concern about medicine and research and also, you know, drug manufacturing as well as medical we've got to worry about defense and staying ahead with AI as far as the need for energy. So I would just say, you know, maybe spread out where you can get some folks to help you because you're right on, you know, and if the defense industry were in here, I think they'd be yelling and screaming too, because you're preparing the basics for them to be able to do the other things to preserve the country. So that's just a thought, and I'm sorry.
It's okay, you're right on. We need to lobby Congress, and we need to talk to our federal partners, and we could use your help with Andy Harris, frankly, if you'd be willing to, because you're right. Any response?
Every one of us, the three of us, and all of our brothers and sisters in the community colleges and the private colleges, we're in the fight together. Yes, we all belong to associations inside the Beltway that are fighting this fight, and we're all walking the halls. So, yes, if you all can help us, it would be that much more powerful. With regard to Harford County, my colleague Mark Ginsburg, the president of Towson University, is working very closely to enhance what Towson University is doing in Harford County. And we're also building our relationships with APG. We need more partnerships than ever.
Alliance, which is a private group, and so if you haven't connected with them, they are great, because when we had the last BRAC, which was a long time ago, and actually I was around still, but anyway, we were very successful, and they are very successful, so if you need to find out about them, I can give you some contacts.
By the way, I would just make one more comment. I know there's been a heavy focus on healthcare and teaching. We understand the opportunities with regard to the Department of Defense. If we had time to call President Pines up here, he would tell you that an institution like College Park works very closely with the Department of Defense. We have our other federal agencies. So I assure you that nothing's being ignored, even though we focus on a few areas today.
Well, I just want to make sure, you know, because I'm new to appropriations. I'm still on judiciary.
Thank you.
Just to give a shout out to President Darrell Pines from College Park. He and I are members of the Higher Ed Council of the National Council on Competitiveness, where he's bringing the quantum voice and we're bringing the AI voice to the table. And I believe President Pines is maybe about 25 or so university presidents across the country, from Big Ten, Ivy League, University of Chicago, you name it. And so he certainly is there carrying the message forward of how important the value of research and innovation are for the country. And we are actually hosting the National Council on Competitiveness, University of Maryland, College Park, and Morgan. I believe, President Pines, that's going to be in April, or I believe March or April. And so we will extend invitations to all of you to come and be a part of that and to help us carry forward the message.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Thanks for all your work. And I do want to thank the other presidents that were here as well. Dr. Ashby, president of the Speaker's Alma Mater, UMBC, Dr. Ginsburg, Towson, Dr. Gerald, University of Maryland, Baltimore, Dr. Jenkins, Dr. Morales Wilhelm from Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and of course, Dr. Pines, who was just mentioned. So thank you to all our presidents. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Phillips, Dr. Perman, Dr. Breaux. I also want to thank you all for your partnership over the last couple of years in helping to resolve Maryland's fiscal situation, which has resulted in this surplus. And I also want to say, moving forward, talking to the speaker here today, and I know the subcommittee chair, we understand that this is a moment where we need full funding of our formulas for higher education, and that's where the House intends to be this coming session. So thank you all for your partnership.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I think anything else? All right, we're adjourned.